town was clouded with tension, like the calm before a thunderstorm. There were whispers and rumors everywhere. People who had once adored El were now quietly questioning his so-called divine powers. The promises of wealth and prosperity had never materialized, and those who had offered up their treasures to the so-called anointed prophet were beginning to feel the weight of betrayal. And yet, amidst the growing doubts, El remained calm, too calm perhaps. His initial plan was to go to the hospital secretly, where Grace lay, to use any means to end her life. But he knew that wasn't possible. Grace was guarded by the police. The case had reached the media and the highest corridors of government. All eyes were on him. Some villagers still trusted El like he was their lifeline. They couldn't afford to question him. These die-hard believers, the ones who had given the most, were caught in his web, trapped between faith and reality. El now channeled his energy on his sermons. Though laced with passion, he spoke of the devil hovering among them, working through those who had dared to doubt him. He warned of eternal fire and damnation to everyone who turned against God's messenger. As his voice echoed through the town square, he reminded them of the miracles they had witnessed. But now, people were starting to second guess what kind of miracles he was talking about. They exchanged hidden glances during his sermons. The seed of suspicion had been planted deep. Meanwhile, Anna, Grace's mother, spent her days and nights at her daughter's bedside in the hospital. Grace lay unconscious. Although her bruises were fading slowly, she looked fragile. Each breath she took was a reminder of how close she came to death. The doctors had little hope. Anna prayed constantly, not just for Grace to wake up, but for the truth to be finally revealed. Anna decided to contact a private investigative journalist to uncover El's past. Meanwhile, deep down, Sarah had begun to question everything. Was El truly a man of God? What kind of man did she marry? Or had they both been living a life of lies? El's paranoia led him to gather a small group of his most trusted followers. These were the men who had gained the most from El's fraud. His loyal men who had smuggled gold with him, men who have assisted him with his fake prophecies and miracles, men who knew just enough of his secrets to be dangerous. But even they were growing restless. The gold had stopped coming, and El's promises of wealth had all but vanished into thin air. They were loyal, yes, but loyalty only went as far as their pockets were full. "We need something big," El told them one evening, his voice shaking with urgency. "Something that will make them believe me again." And so he planned a grand crusade. Miracle Healing Crusade. It was his last hope, his final play to hold on to the crumbling empire he had built. He promised that God had revealed to him a final glorious blessing, one that would rain upon all who attended. This would be the spectacle that erased the doubts, restored his power, and crushed any whispers of rebellion. The night of the crusade arrived. The town square was packed with hundreds of people, drawn by a mix of hope and curiosity. All stood before them, his robes flowing, his arms lifted towards the heavens. His voice rang out, strong and commanding, as he prayed for God to heal the sick and bring prosperity to the land. The villagers watched in silence, their faces a mix of disbelief and hope. This was it, the moment that would either save El or destroy him. El called forward the sick and the crippled, promising healing with the touch of his hands. The crowd held its breath as he placed his hand on a young girl with a broken leg. "Walk," he commanded. his voice full of certainty. For a moment, the crowd leaned forward, hope shining in their eyes. But then, the girl's leg buckled, and she fell back into her wheelchair, crying in pain. Elle's face twisted in frustration. "It is your lack of faith. That's why you are not receiving the healing," he shouted at the girl, quickly moving on to the next miracle. One by one, he attempted healings, but one by one, they failed. The blind remained blind. The lame could not walk. The sick continued to suffer. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd, sharp and accusing. "Where is the gold, prophet? Where is the gold? Where is the wealth you promised us?" Another voice followed, filled with grief. "You said my wife would be healed, and now she is dead." The crowd began to turn, faces twisted with rage. Al's most loyal followers rushed to his side, forming a human shield around him. But the mob was growing restless, and El could feel his power slipping away. As chaos erupted in the square, El was rushed back to his compound by his enforcers, safe behind the compound walls. In the dark hours of the night, as the village seethed with anger, El made a decision. He would run away. He would take whatever gold he had left and disappear before the mob came for him. He couldn't keep up the charade any longer. But Sarah, standing in the doorway, blocked his path, her eyes red from crying, her voice shaking. "We can't run," she whispered. "You have to face the law, El. Return the people's gold to them." El's face twisted in frustration. He tried to push Sarah away, but Sarah stood her ground. She had grown tired of the lies, the deception, and the guilt that gnawed at her every day. Meanwhile, Anna's determination was paying off. The journalist she had contacted had uncovered El's past, a history of fraud in the US, under a different name. His web of deception spans years and continents, leaving behind shattered communities and countless missing women. He recruits a team of loyal men, compensating them generously to find individuals willing to pose as the sick, oppressed, or destitute, desperate for healing and salvation. He orchestrates elaborate crusades, fabricating miracles to gain the community's trust. Once he is ingrained himself, he employs cunning and sinister methods to exploit them. In addition, he operates smelting facilities, exporting gold to his accomplices. Once the community is thoroughly drained, he flees, ready to prey on his next unsuspecting victims. The journalist was ready to publish the story, and Anna knew it would tear Elle's empire apart. Grace still lay in her hospital bed, still unconscious. The doctors had all but given up hope, but Anna refused to let go. She spent every waking moment by her daughter's side, whispering to her, urging her to wake up. Then one quiet evening, Grace's eye fluttered open. Anna gasped, clutching her daughter's hand. Grace was weak, her voice barely a whisper, but she managed to say one word: Elle. The doctors examined her and happily announced that Grace would be okay. Grace was starting to respond well to treatment, and after some weeks, Grace was finally better. This was Grace's testimony, the dark truth revealed. The room fell silent, waiting for her to speak. Her mother, Anna, held her hand tightly, as if her strength alone could keep Grace safe from the horrors she was about to relive. Grace swallowed hard, her voice barely more than a whisper, yet filled with a haunting intensity. It was supposed to be a special day, she began. El said he had a surprise for me, something big. He said he wanted to buy acres of land for us. A future, he called it. He promised me life of happiness. Her voice cracked and she closed her eyes, the weight of the memory bearing down on her. The room remained still, waiting. I trusted him, she continued after a moment. We left the village in his car. At first, it felt like any other outing, but then he started driving further away, deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker and the path narrower. I asked him where we were going, but he just smiled and said it was a surprise. He told me he wanted to show me the land. Grace's grip on her mother's hand tightened as she relived the nightmare. Her voice trembled. But the forest, it was so thick. No one would ever build anything out there. I asked him, "What kind of land are you planning to buy here, El?" But he just kept driving. Her mother whispered softly, encouraging her to continue. "It's okay, Grace. Continue. Tell us what happened next." Finally, we arrived at this secluded building. It was hidden deep in the woods, like a place that was meant to be forgotten. I didn't want to go inside. Everything inside me screamed to run. But El, he wouldn't let me leave. He grabbed my arms, harder than he ever had before, and pushed me towards the door. I begged him to take me back, but he wouldn't listen. Her voice wavered as tears welled in her eyes. When we stepped inside, the smell hit me first. It was the smell of death. I didn't understand at first, but then I saw them, the bodies, the bodies of the women buried in the dirt, the bodies of the women who had disappeared, some half covered. Their faces were twisted in fear and pain. I could see they had been tortured. They were just lying there, lifeless. A shudder passed through the room as Grace's voice dropped to a whisper, filled with terror. I looked at El, and he wasn't himself anymore. He looked at me like someone possessed, like the devil had taken over him. His eyes were wild, dark, filled with something evil. He grabbed a sword from the wall. This old rusted blade. He told me I was going to join them. He said it was my fate. Grace's voice broke as she described the moment El raised the sword over her. I screamed. I begged him to stop, but he didn't listen. He swung at me, cutting me across my arms. I fell to the ground, blood pouring from the wound. I thought I was going to die. The room was silent, except for the sound of Grace's shaky breath. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. That's when I heard him, she continued, her voice growing more urgent. A man's voice. It was the hunter. He had heard my screams. He rushed into the building, just as El was about to finish me off.
He tackled Elle and they fought. I've never seen anything like it. The hunter was strong, but Elle, he was like a madman. He slashed him with the sword, cutting him deep. But the hunter didn't give up. He fought with everything he had. Grace's eyes filled with tears as she remembered the hunter's final moments. He was bleeding so much, so much, but he managed to get me out of there, carrying me through the woods. I could hear Elle behind us. Since he was also wounded, he was also trying to run slowly to catch up with us, chasing us, screaming that we couldn't escape. The hunter was losing strength, but he kept going. Even as he bled out, he brought me to a clearing, to a place where someone could find me. Her voice dropped to a whisper again, filled with sorrow. He died right there. He saved my life, but he died for it. Anna squeezed Grace's hand, her own tears falling silently. The room was tense with grief and rage, everyone hanging on Grace's every word. Grace continued, her voice weaker now, as if each word cost her more than the last. Elle kept coming after us. He wanted to finish what she started. He wanted to finish me. I thought it was over, but then the police arrived. Elle collapsed in front of them, pretending to be hurt. He was lying, but I was too weak to say anything. I collapsed too, and that's all I remember until I woke up here. The room fell silent, filled with the weight of her testimony. Anna wept quietly, stroking her daughter's hand. Grace, exhausted from the effort of telling her story, closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The truth was out now. The dark secret Elle had buried for so long had finally come to light. The women, the lies, the murder, everything was exposed. Justice was coming for the false prophet. With Grace's testimony in the journalist's explosive article, Elle's empire began to collapse. Elle tried to flee in the dead of the night, but the authorities, tipped off by the journalist, intercepted him. He was arrested on and charged for fraud, manslaughter, and conspiracy. His followers abandoned him. Even as Elle sat in his prison cell, waiting trial, there were whispers that he might escape justice. His connections ran deep, and some feared he would use his remaining wealth and influence to slip away. And yet, in the dark corners of his mind, Elle still plotted. He had always been able to manipulate people, to twist their fate and hope to his advantage. As long as there were desperate souls searching for a miracle, he knew there would be a way to rise again. This time, the reckoning had begun, and this time, there would be no escape. Elle was extradited to the United States, where he faced a life sentence. His wife, Sarah, was so heartbroken.